Hello, all, and welcome to tonight's beer vertical, which I am going to dub the slightly disappointing vertical. I wanted to do two German Marzens against two American Marzens, but unfortunately, all the Eyinger Oktoberfest was sold out. There was some last week, but stupidly, I didn't think to go and pick it up. I was figuring it was probably going to still be on the shelf because it was, in, to be honest, the shelf turd section of the beer store, and I went around to several and I couldn't find any more. So this is going to be a vertical of one German Marzen, two American Marzens, and an American sort of Marzen. Go and refer to my previous review of this one to go and see what I'm talking about here. Now let me go and point this down a little bit so we can kind of, there we go. So we can kind of see what we're talking about here. And I was debating, I don't have four, similar glasses. This one, as you know, is a plastic glass that's kind of got a blue tint to it. I was more concerned about getting something with a similar a similar mouth so I can, nose it a bit better than ones that I can see the color. So I wanted something where I could nose it, and so this kind of took, I finally decided on this one. So, how are we going to do this? Well, let me go and sort this. Here. So this one, 5.9. This is a Spaten Oktoberfest. This one is 5.5 Amber Marzen from Sierra Nevada. Samuel Adams, 5.3 ABV. And this one from Golden Road, which they call themselves a German-style amber lager, is 5.8. So, let's go and get to quickly pouring these out, shall we? That's the problem with these verticals, is that it's going to take some time to pour all these out. Some of these have a wider mouth on the glass than others. I'm going to try to compensate for that by doing higher pours. Huh, Sierra Nevada one's kind of proceeding pretty quickly here. Now, I don't have a lamp here anymore, so I can't really go and shine a light through. Suppose I can use my cell phone, which is probably what I'm going to end up doing. Interestingly, the Golden Road one seems to be the one that formed the most amount of head after the Spaten. As for head color, it appears that the Samuel Adams is slightly darker than the rest of them, though it doesn't really show up as well. There we go. Doesn't really show up as well. Okay, let's go and do the nosing while the heads are still here. And then we're going to have to move it. Malty, slightly honeyed. Heading is almost gone from this one. Malty and slightly honeyed. Oh, very honeyed. Very honeyed. Very biscuity. Malty, but also probably has the strongest smell of hops to it. There's a sort of floral hopping that's apparent to this. That's not really as apparent in the rest of them. This one, the nose is almost completely gone because the head dissipated so quickly. I'm not exactly sure why. Coloration-wise, let me go and grab my cell phone here so we can go and see light difference here. Starting, I'm try to point this down. The darkest, it's interesting. The light itself seems to, because when I actually look at it, the Sam Adams doesn't seem to be the darkest, but when you shine a light, it tends to be the darkest. This one, the Spaten and the Sierra Nevada look a bit darker, but this is also the widest glass, so that might have something to do with that. Carbonation-wise, Golden Road is definitely, probably can't see it too well. Golden Road is definitely the most carbonated, followed by the Sierra Nevada, the Oktoberfest, and finally the Spaten. It's carbonated, but the bubbles seem to be moving much slower than the rest of them. Now again, that might have more to do with glass shape than the actual beer. Okay, let's get to the palate tasting now, shall we? I already have the handy water here to clear my palate. I'm going to move this up while I do. So, starting with the Spaten. Brown bread, hops in the finish, slight skunk. But not overly so. I think it would be fair to say that almost all of these are going to be considered biscuity on my scale of maltiness. Okay, let's clear the palate. What's interesting is that these all came out of the same part of the refrigerator. This one seems perceptually a bit more cold on my tongue. Have no idea why that is. The maltiness is definitely less than the Spaten. This is Sierra Nevada. And the bittering hops are definitely clearly there in the mid to finish. Much more so than the Spaten. On to Samuel Adams Oktoberfest. This one definitely has the most grainiest profile to the malts. Very grainy. That honeyed note in the nose is also an effervescent note when you're drinking this, especially up in the front. There's a slight flaw to this one. There's a slight metallic taste to it. Interesting, since it didn't come out of a can, but then metallic taste has, metallic taste of beer has very little to do with, actual contact with the metal and more to do with the brewing process. It's not overly strong, but it is there. Mostly in the mid to finish, very briefly there. Golden Road. Comparatively speaking, much stronger hop than the rest of them by far. Again, it's nothing like an IPA or even a pale ale in regards to hopping. It's still a malt forward, malt centric beer, but the hops are definitely there, both in the nose and on the palate. Very strong bittering aspect in the mid to finish. It doesn't linger. It's clean. Can definitely, as this one's warming up, can definitely tell that New World hops were used as opposed to Old World hops. Again, still malt forward, malt centric, but there's a pininess to the hoppiness, to the hop bitterness in the finish. Actually, wait. I ate dinner before this for obvious reasons. This one by far is the odd one out. This is a Golden Road one. And honestly, I was expecting it to be the odd one out. That hopping is just so much more apparent. Interestingly, while it's not as bitter as the Sierra Nevada has a certain dimensionality to the hops where you can say, yes, these are New World bittering hops that are being used. Very piney. But this one still has much more of a bitter aspect to the mids to finish. Excuse me. Oh boy, I'm going to regret this tomorrow morning. This is basically, 4 beers is about my max, so. So, which one of these do I like the best? Well, first I'd like to say that all of these are very roughly similar, but at the same time, I really think that I could do a blind test of this, blind taste test of this. Um, it would be difficult, if you blindfolded me right now, it'd be very easy. It would be a bit more difficult if I was going into it truly blind, i.e., without having tried the beers for several days and then just, you know, having it put in front of me, just allowing me to watch this video so I get the various taste differences. But my brain has ceased to function. What was I going at? All of these, each one has its own particular flaw. And let's start with the Golden Road one. This is the odd one out because technically I don't think it's a Marzen. It's not classified as a Marzen. It's much more hop than I would think the style would be, to be allowably classified under the style, and thusly they didn't classify it under the style, whether they just classified it as a sort of generic Oktoberfest beer. So, and I think that's a fair thing. It's evocative of Oktoberfest beers, being malty, being 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 malty, being hearty, but it just has a level of hopping that's more acceptable to American craft beer drinkers. This one I'm actually kind of surprised with, having put it alongside the rest of them. In that it's malty, so you taste the malt before everything, but the malt has so little dimensionality. I can't really say it's really heavy. When put along with the rest of them, it doesn't have like that as much of a brown bread. It doesn't have as much graininess, and that hopping is so unmistakably New World with its pininess that it's kind of weak put to side by side, which is surprising to me, anyways. Oops, just a moment. Sam Adams. Probably the most German seeming of the American ones, but not quite there. The level of sweetness to it um, is a bit too much for my own particular liking, though I think it's still within style. And it has a sort of very slight metallic taste flaw to it. Spaten one, save this one for last. Of these four that I'm going through today, I would say this one is my favorite, but it is not without its own flaw, namely the slight skunkiness, that very slight now, let me go and emphasize that, to be had from the fact that it uses, that it came out of a green bottle. I think it would be better if it came out of a brown bottle or a can, or straight from a tap, well, ideally. When I was doing a standalone of this, I kind of poo-pooed the Marzen aspect, but now having it all side by side, I have to kind of reassess that and say, yeah, it is sort of the Marzen, in that of this particular bunch, it is the one that I think best upholds my understanding, my interpretation of the style. And again, your mileage may vary with that. Uh, there's another review earlier from one of the channels I kind of follow where someone said Marzens are the Bud Light of Germany. And I kind of joked in the comments and said, them's fighting words, brother. And I made that as a joke because, one, I love Marzens. But at the same time, I'm not dead serious because I think this is subjective, and he is perfectly within his rights to go and think Marzens are the Bud Lights of German beers. I wouldn't. The biggest quibble I would have with that, honestly, is like saying that it's the Bud Light of German beers. I would say it's more like the Bud Regular of German beers because they're heavy as opposed to light. But, he wasn't making that sort of distinction. He was saying that they're kind of bleh. And that's his own opinion. That's his own taste. And, um, what can I say? So, this has been interesting for me in a variety of ways because this is becoming very difficult for me to go and cogate sentences together in a way that doesn't sound. This is why I usually only have 2 to 3 beers and then call it a night, man. And usually I'm a lot slower on the uptake too. And I've kind of drunk at least about 1/3 of 4 beers, a 20-minute period here. So I'm going to go and try to wrap this up without rambling too much. I highly suggest everyone do a vertical every now and then. Perhaps not as many as and this quantity beer that I just did, but the results can be surprising, uh, even to somebody who drinks a lot of beer like myself. And with that, folks, I'm going to see. These are probably going to be pretty warm by the time I finish them all. I'm going to slow down now for obvious reasons. But yeah, Marzen. That's the winner for tonight. For the TLDR. And try this. Try doing a vertical, and you may be surprised at the results you get. So that's your vertical beer review for tonight, folks. Cheers, Prost, and probably don't do this as intensely as I did, for obvious reasons. You have a good night, folks. Prost.